Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, we are here today to address what has been called a finance bill. I want to serve notice on the Senate that this abuse of the omnibus process by parachuting matters that ought to be addressed separately and distinctly will be challenged. Mr. President, as I understand it, before I get into the meat of my presentation, a finance bill supposed to reflect measures requiring legislative changes to meet certain deadlines arising out of a budget statement. That is what a finance bill is supposed to accomplish. But we are seeing, Mr. President, efforts being made to introduce measures that ought not to be in a finance bill. Procurement, national insurance, property tax are examples. Mr. President, I am not going to detain you or this honorable House any longer. I just serve notice. This is a matter that will be brought to your attention because it is becoming an abuse of the process. And I serve notice that that is unsatisfactory. Mr. President, let me begin my formal address to you on this issue before us. That is the Finance Bill 2023, which contains, as you have been advised, some 8 clauses, and it amends 6 pieces of legislation that are before us. But in looking at this piece of legislation very closely, a very famous political philosopher comes to mind. His name, as I recalled, Harold Lasswell. And he, Mr. President, coined like a phrase, when we talk about politics, we are talking about who gets what, when, and how. That is what Lasswell tells us about politics. And when we look at the bill before us, and we look at the various provisions contained in the bill before us, Mr. President, it does manifest clearly Lasswell's statement, because what we are seeing in this Finance Bill 2023, in this period of peace and goodwill upon all men and women, what we are seeing is a gift coming as we approach Christmas. But the gift is not coming to the working class. The gift is not coming to the poor, the downtrodden, and the wretched. The gift is coming in large quantities financially to the financiers of the PNM. It is almost like a bonanza, a windfall for the financiers of the PNM. Some of them even beginning to deal with the dead. And I'll talk about that because I had a challenge going to a conference in Switzerland where I was only allowed $300 US. But I am seeing where financiers of the PNM and their bizarre rituals, these elements who are performing that, are getting tens of thousands of US dollars. I can't get that. But people who are dealing with the dead and talking to the dead and messing with the dead, they are now, Mr. President, able to access tens of thousands of US dollars. I raise this in passing, Mr. President, because there's a particular clause in this bill that talks about supporting exports of manufacturers and allowing those exporters, once they reach within a 30% category of their gross income, not to pay business levy. And that is designed, Mr. President, to encourage these exporters to export more. And the purpose of exporting more is to earn more foreign exchange, which is a scarce commodity in Trinidad and Tobago. So we are encouraging, by foregoing business levy to the manufacturing class so they can export more, so we can earn more foreign exchange. But what are we earning more foreign exchange for? To give people to perform obia? That is why we are earning foreign exchange? So that somebody could go to a place called Fort Myers in Florida, and each participant can get tens of thousands of US dollars to perform what? Bizarre rituals? Mr. President, let us be serious. This is serious business that we are dealing with. And the government comes here with a series of measures to give more and more incentives, more and more allowances, more and more opportunities to the business, to their business friends, to their financiers. Mr. President, we have our Minister of Digital Transformation. I don't know if the minister himself needs a transformation, because digital transformation is going nowhere. So here it is. We are the victims of cyber attack, ransomware attack, left, right, and center. Ministry of the Attorney General. The Prime Minister, well, I don't know if the Prime Minister's office has been hacked. But you have private companies like Massey, where almost 1 million customer files is on the dark web. You have TSTT, same thing. What is the Ministry of Digital Transformation doing about this? Absolutely nothing. So what we have come here to do is to give their big financiers up to $500,000 to buy what? Software, cyber security software, and network hardware to protect themselves purportedly from cyber attacks. But these are the same people, Mr. President. Some of them, and they have to explain it to this country, using our foreign exchange to perform bizarre rituals. Look, I call on the Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, who is the chairman of Massey. I call on Gervais Warner, who is the CEO, to explain to Trinidad and Tobago this headline story in today's papers where they are using our foreign exchange to perform devil.
Senator Mark, we have a bill before us that is very specific in the clauses and what it lays out. Whereas you may have started to connect it to the bill, you're starting to veer off and go into a realm that's not relevant to what is before us. So I ask you to come back to the bill before us.
Thank you, Mr. President. Whenever you find me straying, it is your duty to bring me back in line. So I welcome that. Mr. President, I have said that there are several measures in this bill. One, public procurement. Two, public property tax rather. Three, national insurance. Mr. President, you were here, but you weren't sitting there. 18 months ago, you were the vice president. I recall distinctly on the 30th of June 2022, the minister in the Ministry of Finance, the Honorable Brian Manning, made his contribution on the same measure that we are debating today. Mr. President, we got an undertaking. I remember Senator Vieira rising on his feet, seeking from the minister assurances that they are taking action against delinquent employers. And we got an undertaking from the minister that yes, we give you the assurance, we are tackling it. Not only are we tackling it, Mr. President, but we were told by the minister that there's a particular kind of equipment that they have purchased or they have at NIB to detect all delinquent employers who are not making their contributions to the NIB. So you can imagine my shock and surprise that I saw in a finance bill another amnesty for employers who have failed to make their statutory contributions in accordance with the law on behalf of their companies and employees. So we are being told, let us, through this bill, legalize fraud, legalize lawbreakers, legalize people who are not upholding the NIB law or the National Insurance Act. Mr. President, how can that be fair? What are we doing to the NIB? Yes, we might get a 100 million, as the minister said, but what is that doing? Mr. President, I call on the Honorable Minister to be transparent, to be accountable, to be open by telling the Senate, who are these companies? What are the names of the companies? Are they financiers of the PNM? We want the names of the companies that are going to get this BLI for a second time in 18 months. We want to know how much money each of them was supposed to pay and they didn't pay. And Mr. President, if we are going to waive penalties and interest, what is the sum involved? We don't know. We have no information. We have no evidence. coming from the government on this matter, Mr. President. So here it is. The Minister of Finance comes to this Parliament, Mr. President, and he seeks to get our approval for not only the same matters that we dealt with 18 months ago, but he goes a step further, Mr. President. The minister tells us that the public procurement law was proclaimed last April. And before that, in July, there was an amnesty. So they got caught up with the timelines. So because they got caught up with the timelines, they are asking us now to give them a bly. So not only is the minister seeking to extend through the National Insurance Board National Insurance Clearance Certificates, Mr. President, from what? 1 month to 3 months. Not only is the minister coming here to ask us to legalize a process of payment of national insurance to the National Insurance Board because they want to be pre-qualified, Mr. President, under the public procurement law. They want to be pre-selected under the public procurement law. And to be pre-selected and pre-qualified, you must meet all your statutory obligations, including NIS contributions. That is what we are being told that the government is seeking us to support this morning in this Parliament, Mr. President. Is the government serious, Mr. President? After 2 consecutive wrongs? Why is the government weaponizing legislation in order to fund their private interests through their financiers? So Parliament is now being weaponized in order to achieve certain objectives and goals on the part of the government. That cannot be fair. So, Mr. President, when you talk about national insurance and this so-called amnesty, which is being introduced for the second time consecutively over an 18-month period, it is unacceptable. It is not keeping with what we are. We are supposed to be a law-abiding population, a law-abiding nation. We are subject to the rule of law. Yes, you came the first time. We objected. Mr. President, you come the second time in 18 months and saying, give these people a second bly. Mr. President, they collected your national insurance contributions, 1/3, 2/3. They utilize it. They spend it. And then they come back to you now and to me in the Parliament and say, listen, we want an amnesty. You see all the money we spend? It's no problem. Just give us an amnesty, we'll pay it back. And we must support that. How can we support that? That is illegal. That is law breaking. Mr. President, how can we solve crime when white-collar criminals are able to get through scotch-free? What are we doing? So you have, Mr. President, the Parliament taking out from your income and my income, salary, every month, NIS. And they send it statutorily to the NIB. We are upholding the law. So when we retire, we can get what we are entitled to. There are other employers who are collecting and they are spending, they are retaining, then they are not sending their monies to the NIB. And we come here with legislation to give these people an amnesty. You're giving lawbreakers an amnesty? Mr. President, how can we support that? We can't. We cannot support that. We didn't support it in June of 2022, and we will not support it in December, on December 19th, 2023. So that is an area, Mr. President, of grave concern to us. Now we go to the property tax. And the government has indicated, Mr. President, but before we go there, to the property tax, I want to share with you, Mr. President, this whole issue of public procurement. The government is bringing an amendment to the Public Procurement Act. So instead of putting goods and services, Mr. President, they are now including goods, services, and works. And Mr. President, you know what that does? When you go to the bill, when you go to the act, Mr. President, on public procurement, it tells you, it gives you, Mr. President, what is called a definition of works. So if you go to this piece of legislation, it tells us that works includes construction and engineering works of all kinds. That is in the definition section. So you are coming to us. You want $1 million. Your permanent secretaries in every public body, whether it's a ministry, whether it's the president's house, whether it's the parliament, whether it's the judiciary, whether it's WASA, you have up to $1 million to spend without any accountability, without any transparency, without any integrity, without any honesty. And we must support that. We must give, Mr. President, the executive a blank check. Mr. President, this could amount to hundreds of millions of dollars over a period of time. And all they have to do, Mr. President, is to go up to 300,000 and they're okay. Go up to 400,000 and they're okay. Go up to 500,000, 600,000, up to 999,000, and there will be no accountability, no transparency, no honesty, no integrity. Is that the purpose of this exercise, Mr. President? What are we doing? Mr. President, when you talk about value for your money, how is this adding up when you do what the government is seeking to do here? Mr. President, it's $1 million. $1 million might sound small change for a billionaire, for a multi-billionaire. But when it comes to public interests, when it comes to the people's business, $1 million is plenty money. And there is no accountability for that. Mr. President, I would suggest to the government, scrap the Public Procurement Act. Repeal it. It really has no value. Because what this government has done, Mr. President, they have come year in, year out, in an effort to undermine public procurement in Trinidad and Tobago. So whereas we thought $1 million, if you want, and the minister said in his contribution in the other place, if you want to build a box drain, if you want to build a pavement, if you want to repair a school, you could get that for $500,000. You could get that to a small contractor for $700,000. But Mr. President, what does that mean? It means that the government can select who they wish to give the $700,000 award of that particular project to. So elections is around the corner, 24 or 25. So is this part of an election campaign to just give the government a blank check to do whatever they want, Mr. President? So here it is. Whether you talk about public procurement, you're seeing they're having a free ride. When they talk about cybercrime or cybersecurity, you have a maximum of $500,000 for their friends. You talk about education, private and public, $500,000 in forever, as far as the minister is concerned. And Mr. President, here it is. We are back on this issue of the property tax. 200,000 people are supposed to be on the valuation roll. We were supposed to get 400,000. We have 200,000. So, Mr. President, the government is so desperate right now for revenue that you know what they have done, Mr. President? They cannot even operationalize through proclamation the miscellaneous Local Government Reform Act to give it effect. So you know what has to be done? The Minister of Finance has now issued an order under a section of the Act that allows him to order municipal corporations to collect taxes on properties belonging to citizens who happens to be residents in the particular corporation. And the Board of Inland Revenue is providing the names, the addresses, the identification numbers of all those owners of property and land in the particular corporation. And Mr. President, they are to collect. So regional corporations have become policemen. They are policing this whole process on behalf of the Board of Inland Revenue. So they are collecting, Mr. President, corporation, that is, residential taxes. So they are collecting. And when you don't pay, Mr. President, the regional corporations have to provide all those names of delinquent residential owners of property. Any failure on their part not to meet their property tax obligations. So they are watchmen. They are watching after the interests of the Board of Inland Revenue. And if you don't pay, Mr. President, your information will go to the Board of Inland Revenue. And you know, Mr. President, there's a process under the Property Tax Act. Starts off with high interest, and then it graduates with forfeiture. So you could be deprived of your property if you're unable to pay. And this nonsense, Mr. President, that if you can't pay, you're an elderly person or you're a pensioner, leave it up to your children who inherit your property. So there is forever a burden on the next generation. That is what slavery was about. But I thought we abolished that. But the PNM seemed to have reintroduced it. Mr. President, I want to make it very clear. A united National Congress government that is coming into office very shortly after the next general election will review and revisit this entire Property Tax Act. We are calling on the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It's only a few more months. We will not support and we will never support this version of property tax. We have made that very clear. We are not supporting this PNM version of the property tax. We will replace it. So the people can be assured that the United National Congress will address their concerns as it relates to this draconian measure. Mr. President, why has the government, at a time when people are undergoing so much economic, social, emotional, psychological stressors, why would a government choose this time to introduce such an oppressive tax on the backs of the residents of Trinidad and Tobago? You know, you have industrial users who can afford. They bypass them. They give them a blind. They say, no, we are coming for you now. They have commercial people. No. But you know who they're coming for? They're coming for you. They're coming for me. They're coming for us as residents. And you know what was even more tragic, Mr. President? They were supposed to have 400,000 persons on the valuation roll. They came to this parliament. They cut it by 50%. They say, look, to get that valuation roll going and for us to effect property tax, all we need, Mr. President, is 200,000 persons who own homes. So we are prisoners of the government. 200,000. So, Mr. President, what is going to happen to the other 200,000 that are not incorporated in the legislation? Are they going to be given a blight? So are we 200,000 residents who are being called upon to pay residential tax? Is it a situation of we are going to be subsidizing those people? Are we going to be subsidizing, Mr. President, the industrial users? Are we going to be subsidizing the commercial users? Mr. President, the government has to get serious. This cannot be fair. We in the United National Congress reject out of hand the PNM property tax in Trinidad and Tobago, and we will repeal it.
Senator, you have 5 more minutes.
We will repeal it. So, Mr. President, this package of financial measures that we are called upon to debate today is designed, has been orchestrated it is almost premeditated to benefit only a certain group of people in Trinidad and Tobago. They give crumbs to those people who didn't get their measly 4%, and they give them a $4,000. What is $4,000 in Trinidad and Tobago for a retiree when the cost of living is so high in this land? We give them $4,000 and they pat themselves on the back for doing so. But while they give themselves a pat on the back for giving $4,000 to a retiree, you know, Mr. President, no business levy for manufacturers who export within a tax bracket of 30%. People who run private and public schools, they can now get up to $500,000 in benefits once they offer support. They can claim back up to 150% expenditure. Those people who are involved in cybercrime or cybersecurity matters, and they have had their businesses attacked, whether it is Blue Waters, whether it is ANSA, whether it is Mercy as conglomerates, they can now access up to $500,000 in order to buy cybersecurity equipment, network hardware, and cybersecurity software. So, okay, but there's no overarching legislation in Trinidad and Tobago to protect the citizens. So the government has not brought data protection legislation to protect the rights of the people. There is no proper cyber security law on our statute books, but you're giving out money. You're giving out money to your friends and your family without any legislative framework. Where is the cyber security legislation? Where is it? Where is the Data Protection Act to protect my privacy? Nowhere to be seen. But you're giving out money to financiers. You're giving out money to your supporters. This is discrimination, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, we want to make it very clear in closing. The government of this country, through their policies and actions, have undermined, subverted, and weakened the national insurance system in Trinidad and Tobago. Would you believe that when the PNM came to office, in closing, Mr. President, there were 531 contributors to the NIB? You know what it is, according to the minister? It's down to 491 in 2023. He said in 2022, it was 451. So under the PNM, some 39,000 persons have dropped out of the system through retrenchment, through closures of companies in this country. So the PNM government is actively contributing to the undermining, the subversion of our national insurance system in Trinidad and Tobago by their policies. Mr. President, why after all these years, self-employed people have not come onto the national insurance scheme as a group? That has been something that we have been called for years, but not done. Mr. President, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to make my contribution on this very important matter, and look forward to the government addressing our concerns as it relates to these handouts that they have given to their friends, family, and financiers in this finance bill of 2023. I thank you very much.
Senator Maharaj.